Okay, so I was looking into some stuff about the Necrons the other day. They're these skeletal robot warriors
Yeah.
who have basically been asleep for millions of years. It's crazy.
The idea that they've been around for so long, just like dormant,
Yeah.
it's fascinating and terrifying at the same time.
Totally.
It really puts things into perspective, you know? Like our little conflicts and concerns here, they seem so insignificant when you think about these ancient beings just waiting to wake up after millions of years.
I know, right? It makes you wonder what they'll do when they fully awaken. Like, will they be content to just reclaim their lost territory, or will they try to take over the entire galaxy?
Who knows?
But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's start with the basics. Who were the Necrons before they became these metal-killing machines? What drove them to become the soulless creatures we know them as today?
Yeah. So the Necrons weren't always robots. You know, they started as the Necrontyr, an organic species that lived in a star system called the Halo stars. And their sun was incredibly harsh, constantly bombarding them with radiation, and it caused them to have very short, disease-ridden
Oh,
lifespans.
wow.
Their entire existence was a struggle against a dying sun, and it's no wonder they became obsessed with finding a way to escape their fate.
That's grim. I can see why they were so desperate to find a way to live longer. So how did they go from flesh and blood to, well, walking metal skeletons? Did they stumble across some ancient technology, or did they make a deal with some higher power?
Well, their story is a classic case of be careful what you wish for. The Necrontyr were technologically advanced for their time, but their society was also incredibly fractured, constantly at war with itself.
Oh, okay.
In their search for a way to cheat death, they came into contact with the Tan.
Hold on. Did you just say Kurtan? I thought they were pronounced Seatan.
Yeah, you're right. It's spelled Tan, but the correct pronunciation is Kurtatan. Yeah. An easy mistake to make, especially given their, well, their otherworldly nature. So these Kurtans were incredibly powerful beings of pure energy, essentially living stars.
Okay.
Now, the Kurtan are a bit tricky to explain as they exist on a scale that's almost beyond our comprehension, but let's just say they were worshipped as gods by the Necrontyr.
So the Necrontyr encountered these Kurtan, these godlike beings of pure energy. Did they strike up a conversation? Did they make some sort of deal? What did the Kurtan want in return for granting the Necrontyr their wish for immortality?
The Kurtan, they were incredibly powerful, but they had a problem. They needed physical forms to interact with the material world.
Mhm.
And the Necrontyr, who were already skilled in manipulating a living metal they called necrodermis, they saw an opportunity.
Necrodermis, that rings a bell. Isn't that the same stuff the Necrons themselves are made of?
Exactly. It's a strange, almost paradoxical substance. It's both metal and organic, capable of self-repair and regeneration. And here's the tragic irony. The Kurtan, in exchange for these new bodies, they offered the Necrontyr the eternal life they craved.
Oh, no.
But it came at a terrible price. They had to undergo a process called biotransference.
Biotransference, that sounds ominous. What exactly does that entail?
Yeah, it's not a pleasant process. Imagine having your very essence, your soul, ripped from your body and transferred into a robotic form made of necrodermis. You would lose everything that makes you, well, you. Your emotions, your personality, your very identity, all of it would be gone, leaving only a hollow shell driven by ancient programming.
So they achieved immortality, but at the cost of their very souls.
Hmm.
Seems like a pretty raw deal.
Most of the Necrontyr were transformed into mindless drones. Their individuality was completely erased. Only a select few, the most powerful warriors and the nobility, they retained some semblance of their former selves. They became the Necron lords, overlords, and cryptechs. But even they were forever changed, shadows of their former selves. Their yearning for life led them to become something less than alive.
What a horrifying twist. I mean, they got what they wished for, but at what cost? They essentially traded their humanity for immortality.
Yeah.
What happened to these newly formed Necrons? They were driven by this thirst for longer life. So how did that manifest once they achieved this, well, this warped version of it?
Well, you have to remember that resentment they felt towards the old ones, the beings who seemed to effortlessly possess the long life and psychic abilities the Necrotyr craved. That resentment, it didn't fade away with biotransference. In fact, fueled by the power of the Kurtan, it intensified. And they were ready to unleash it on a galactic scale. What followed was a war that would reshape the galaxy forever. The War in Heaven.
The War in Heaven. It sounds almost mythical. What was it like? I imagine it was a conflict of unimaginable scale and destruction.
Yeah. Just imagine entire planets being shattered, stars extinguished, and entire civilizations consumed by the fires of war. The Necrons, empowered by the Kurtan, they possessed weapons and technology unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen before.
Whoa.
They could traverse vast distances using phase technology, and their firepower was absolutely devastating. They pushed the old ones to their absolute limits.
Sounds like a brutal, no-holds-barred conflict. What was the Old One's strategy? Did they try to match the Necrons' firepower, or did they have something else up their sleeve?
The old ones, they were masters of the webway. It's a network of interdimensional tunnels that allowed them to move troops and resources quickly and efficiently.
Oh,
It was like having a secret network of highways across the galaxy. They also genetically engineered psychic warriors, harnessing the power of the warp to counter the soulless might of the Necrons. They knew they couldn't win a straight-up slugfest, so they opted for a more cunning approach.
so it was a clash of titans, both sides wielding incredible power. Who had the upper hand in this epic struggle?
The war raged on for centuries, maybe even millennia, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. That is, until the enslaver plague emerged from the warp, the dimension of psychic energy. This horrifying plague ravaged both the old ones and their creations, weakening them and tipping the scales in favor of the Necrons.
So the Necrons, these soulless machines, were aided by a psychic plague that they didn't even create themselves. That's a pretty ironic turn of events. Did this mark the end of the war in heaven? Did the Necrons claim total victory?
The enslaver plague certainly crippled the old ones, allowing the Necrons to claim victory. But the story takes another fascinating turn when you factor in the Silent King, Sarek, the last ruler of the Necrontier. He was a cunning and ambitious leader, deeply resentful of what the Kurtan had done to his people. He allowed the old ones to be defeated, knowing that this would leave the Kurtan vulnerable, weakened by their own efforts.
Oh, wow. A classic betrayal. I'm guessing the Silent King had a plan of his own. What exactly did he have in mind for these Kurtans who had granted his people their wish?
He had a long game in mind, a plan to turn on the Kurtan and reclaim what he believed they had stolen from his people. But the Kurtan, they were incredibly powerful. How do you defeat beings who are essentially living stars? Well, the Silent King, ever the strategist, had a secret weapon up his sleeve. God-killing technology.
Now we're talking. God-killing technology. What was it? Tell me everything.
So the Necrons, under the Silent King's command, they launched a surprise rebellion against the weakened Kurtan, wielding these powerful weapons to shatter them into smaller, more controllable fragments known as shards. These shards were then imprisoned in elaborate dimensional prisons called Tesseract Labyrinth, effectively neutralizing the Kurtan threat.
So the Silent King played the long game, biding his time until he could strike at the weakened Kurtan. That's some serious Machiavellian maneuvering. But I imagine such a daring plan didn't come without a cost.
You're absolutely right. Victory came at a terrible price. Millions of Necrons were lost in the rebellion, including the entire ruling council, the Triarch, save for the Silent King himself. He was left alone, the sole survivor of his gambit, ruling over a race of mostly mindless drones.
So he achieved his goal of defeating the Kurtan and freeing his people from their influence, but at a devastating cost. What happened next? Did the Necrons rebuild their shattered civilization, or did the trauma of their past weigh too heavily on them?
The Silent King, burdened by the weight of his decisions and the immense losses he had orchestrated, chose to exile himself. He left the Necrons to slumber, retreating into the vastness of space to seek solace or perhaps redemption. He ordered the entire Necron race into a 60-million-year sleep, a strategic retreat to allow the galaxy to heal and for the Necrons to gather their strength.
Wow. He put an entire civilization on hold. That's some serious commitment to the long game. I can't imagine the kind of willpower and strategic foresight that would take. But that leaves us with a pretty big question. What happens next? What will the Necrons do when they wake up? And where does the Silent King fit into all of this?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. So, fast forward 60 million years to the 41st millennium. The galaxy is a very different place than it was during the War in Heaven. The Imperium of Man has risen to power, the Orcs are still causing chaos, and the Eldar, the descendants of the Old Ones, are struggling to survive. And amidst all of this, the Necrons are starting to stir from their long slumber.
60 million years is just mind-blowing. It's hard to even grasp the scale of that kind of time.
Did they all wake up at once?
Like a giant alarm clock going off across the galaxy? Or was it More of a gradual awakening.
It's more of a staggered awakening, like a ripple effect spreading across the galaxy. You see, the galaxy isn't exactly a peaceful place, even after 60 million years. Stars explode, planets collide, and space debris impacts those tomb worlds where the Necrons have been sleeping.
Ah,
Some tomb worlds were damaged, their systems malfunctioning, while others reacted to perceived threats in their vicinity. It's almost like a series of unfortunate accidents that are gradually bringing the Necrons back online.
so it's not like they have some grand coordinated plan. They're just waking up as their systems come back online, reacting to whatever threats they encounter. It's a bit unsettling to think that their return is being dictated by random chance.
Yeah, and that's part of what makes them so dangerous.
True.
Imagine dealing with an enemy that doesn't follow conventional logic, that might attack without warning or for seemingly no reason. Some Necron lords are obsessed with reclaiming lost technology, others with restoring their dynasties to their former glory. And then there are those who are driven by a faint echo of that original desire, a longing for true life, a way to somehow reverse the biotransference process and regain what they lost all those millions of years ago.
It's a fascinating and terrifying thought. An entire race of beings driven by the echoes of desires they no longer fully understand. It makes you wonder if they're even capable of free will, or if they're just slaves to their ancient programming. You mentioned Necron lords. It sounds like there's some kind of hierarchy among these robotic overlords.
Yeah, even in their fragmented state, the Necrons retain a rigid hierarchy. It's ingrained in their very programming.
Right.
At the bottom, you have the Necron warriors, the mindless drones that make up the bulk of their armies. Then you have the Immortals, slightly more resilient and independent. Above them are the Necron lords, each commanding their own legions. And at the top, you have the overlords, who control entire regions or planets.
So it's like a pyramid of power, with the most powerful overlords at the top. Is there a single leader, like a Necron emperor, who unites all of these dynasties and lords under their command?
That's a question that even the Necrons themselves might not be able to answer. Remember the Silent King? He vanished into exile millions of years ago. Some Necrons believe he's still out there, watching over them, waiting for the right moment to return. Others believe he's gone forever, leaving them to fend for themselves in a galaxy that has long forgotten them. And that's where things get really interesting, because without a single leader, the Necrons are a fragmented force, each dynasty and lord pursuing their own goals.
You mentioned dynasties. Does that mean there are different factions within the Necron race? Could you tell us more about these different groups and their leaders?
Absolutely. There are countless Necron dynasties, each with its own history, culture, and ambitions. For example, you have the Sotek dynasty, led by Imhotep the Stormlord, a brilliant strategist and ruthless conqueror who seeks to rebuild his dynasty's former empire. Then you have the Nihilak dynasty, who are obsessed with finding a way to reverse biotransference and reclaim their lost souls. And then there's Trazen the Infinite, a rather eccentric overlord from the Mefret dynasty, who's more of a collector than a conqueror.
A collector. What does he collect? Stamps. Rare coins.
He collects history, he's obsessed with preserving the past, even if it means stealing entire cities or armies to add to his collection.
Wait, he steals entire cities? How is that even possible?
Well, the Necrons possess technology that borders on the magical. They have devices like the monoliths, giant floating fortresses that can teleport entire armies across the battlefield,
Okay.
as well as devastating weapons like doomsday cannons that can wipe out entire cities with a single shot. They have technology that can manipulate time, space, and even the fabric of reality itself.
Okay, so they have teleporting fortresses and planet-killing cannons. What else is in their arsenal? What makes them so difficult to fight? I imagine the Imperium has had a few run-ins with these ancient warriors.
Yeah, their weapons are definitely a factor. Gauss flares, for example, fire beams of energy that literally strip their targets down to the atomic level. Imagine being hit by a weapon that doesn't just kill you, but erases you from existence. They also utilize weapons that phase in and out of reality, making them incredibly difficult to target. And then there's the necrodermis itself, the living metal that makes up their bodies.
That's right, we were talking about that earlier. It's the same stuff they used to build bodies for the Kirkitan, right? It can regenerate and repair damage, making them almost impossible to kill. I remember reading something about it being able to reattach limbs. It sounds like something about a horror movie.
It's a truly remarkable substance. It can repair almost any damage, even reattaching limbs or rebuilding entire bodies. And even if you manage to destroy a Necron completely, their body can often just phase out of existence, teleporting back to their tomb world for repairs.
So they're basically unkillable Terminators with a taste for galactic domination. It sounds like a pretty bleak outlook for anyone who crosses their path.
Yeah.
Are there any weaknesses? Is there anything that can stop these seemingly invincible warriors?
There are a few weaknesses. Their soulless nature makes them vulnerable to psychic attacks.
Oh, really?
Psychers, those who wield the power of the warp, can disrupt their systems and even inflict damage that their necrodermis can't easily repair. It's like their greatest strength, their lack of a soul, is also their greatest weakness.
So they're immune to most physical attacks, but susceptible to psychic powers.
That's a fascinating paradox. It makes you wonder if their relentless pursuit of logic and order has made them blind to the more chaotic, unpredictable forces in the universe.
Exactly. It also means that the Necrons are particularly wary of psychers.
Yeah.
They've even developed technologies like the null field matrix, which creates a zone that disrupts psychic energies, essentially creating a safe space where their minds are protected from intrusion. It seems like they've thought of everything. They've been preparing for this return for millions of years, refining their technology and planning their strategies. It makes you wonder what their ultimate goal is. Are they content to just reclaim their lost territories? Or do they have something more ambitious in mind?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
We know they're driven by ancient programming, by a desire to reclaim what they believe is rightfully theirs. But there's also that lingering question of the Silent King.
Right.
What role will he play, if any? Will he return to lead his people? Or will they forge their own path, potentially even finding a way to regain the souls they lost?
It sounds like the fate of the galaxy hangs in the balance. This is some seriously heavy stuff.
Mm.
But before we spiral into existential dread, let's get back to the basics. We've talked about their origins, their technology, their goals. But what about their actual combat tactics? How do these guys fight? What's it like to face them on the battlefield?
Well, that's where their unique AI-driven system comes into play. It's unlike anything you'd see in a conventional army. Imagine each tomb world as a giant supercomputer, constantly analyzing threats and calculating responses.
Why?
It's like a hive mind, but instead of a single consciousness, you have a complex network of AI programs coordinating everything.
So it's not like there's some Necron general standing on a hilltop barking orders. It's more like a distributed network making decisions in real time based on the information it's receiving.
Exactly. They have this thing called the nodal command structure. It's essentially a system of escalating responses based on the level of threat.
Okay.
It starts with the basic warriors, who are essentially expendable probes. If they encounter resistance, the tomb world deploys more specialized units like Immortals or Destroyers.
So they send in wave after wave of increasingly powerful units until the problem is solved. It's like they're playing a video game on easy mode, just throwing bodies at the enemy until something sticks.
It's not quite that simple, but the analogy holds. The Necrons are patient, methodical, and utterly ruthless. They're not afraid to take losses because they know their troops can be repaired or replaced. And as the threat level increases, the tomb world will eventually deploy a Necron Lord to take command.
So the AI hands over control to a sentient commander.
Yeah.
That's an interesting twist. Why do that? Why not just let the computers handle everything?
Well, the Necron Lords, they have unique abilities and a level of strategic insight that the AI, despite its computational power, can't quite replicate. They can adapt to unforeseen circumstances, make intuitive leaps, and inspire their troops in a way that a cold, calculating machine never could.
So it's a blend of cold, calculating AI and the tactical brilliance of these Necron Lords.
Yeah.
It's a pretty potent combination. What happens if a Necron Lord is destroyed? Does the AI take back over? Or does the entire operation grind to a halt?
The Necron's nodal command structure is built for redundancy. There's always a backup plan. If a lord falls, another one will be deployed, or the AI will adjust its strategy accordingly. It's like a self-healing system. Always adapting, always learning, always striving for victory.
It's an incredibly complex system and a bit terrifying to think about. It's like they've turned warfare into an elaborate chess game, with each move calculated and anticipated. But what's it actually like to fight them? Could you give us a sense of what it's like to face these guys on the battlefield?
Imagine a silent, relentless tide of metal skeletons advancing towards you. Their weapons fire with eerie precision, cutting through flesh and bone, and their bodies shrug off even the most devastating attacks. It's like fighting an army of unstoppable ghosts, driven by an ancient hunger that cannot be satiated.
That's a chilling image. I'm guessing morale isn't exactly high when you're facing down an army of immortal robots with planet-killing weapons.
Yeah, there are accounts of Imperial Guard regiments breaking ranks and fleeing in terror at the mere sight of a Necron phalanx. And even Space Marines, the Emperor's finest, have been known to struggle against the Necrons' relentless onslaught.
So even the best of the best have a tough time against these guys. It sounds like humanity is in for a rough ride if the Necrons decide to get serious about reclaiming the galaxy. What other trick do they have up their sleeve?
Well, we've only talked about the Necrons' ground forces. They also have vast fleets of starships capable of traveling across the galaxy using their phase technology. They can appear out of nowhere, launch devastating attacks, and then vanish just as quickly, leaving their enemies reeling in confusion and disarray.
So they're a threat on land, in space. Is there anywhere they're not a threat?
The Necrons are a force unlike anything else in the galaxy. They're ancient, powerful, and driven by an agenda that spans millions of years. Their return marks a new era of conflict, one that could reshape the very fabric of reality itself.
It's almost like they're a force of nature, a cosmic storm that's been brewing for millions of years and is now finally breaking. What does all of this mean for the other races in the galaxy? What are the implications of the Necrons' return?
I mean, the Necrons returning really changes things. Like, everything we thought we knew about who has the power in the galaxy, it's just gone. You know, you have to remember, these are beings who fought a war against the old ones who created, like, life as we know it. The Necrons, they have technology and knowledge that is just way beyond anything that exists today.
It's almost like they're playing a totally different game, like operating on a level that everyone else can barely even understand. Their motives, their tech, just their existence, it challenges every assumption we have about the universe. It makes you wonder if anyone could even come together to fight them off.
That's the big question, isn't it? And the answer, unfortunately, is no, not really. I mean, look at the Imperium. They're so powerful, but also so messed up with all the infighting and corruption. Then there's the Orcs. They just want to fight and destroy everything. There's no way they could ever unite against the Necrons. And the Eldar, they used to be in charge of the galaxy, but now there's just not that many of them left. And they're still dealing with all this stuff from their past.
That's kind of a depressing picture, you know, a galaxy that can't get along up against this ancient enemy that seems impossible to stop. Is there any hope? Can anything be done to stop the Necrons from doing what they want?
That's a tough one, especially with how things are in the 41st millennium. But even when everything is stacked against you, there's always a chance. I mean, the Imperium, they're a mess, but they have a huge army and they desperately want to survive. And there's the Space Marines. There aren't many of them, but they're still incredibly powerful and they could do a lot of damage to the Necrons. And then we have the Eldar. Yeah, they're not what they used to be, but they still have powerful psychic abilities and they know a lot about the webway. And that could be really important in a war against the Necrons.
So it sounds like we're heading towards a showdown, like a massive fight between different groups with ancient grudges and new goals. It's hard to wrap your head around something that big. But where should our listeners go if they want to learn more about the Necrons? What are the best resources to really understand them?
There's so much out there if you want to know more about the Necrons. The official codexes and novels, they have tons of information about their history, their tech, and how they see the galaxy. Plus, there's wikis online and fan communities where people discuss and debate everything about them. You know, I really encourage everyone to check those out and make up their own mind about the Necrons and what they mean in the 41st millennium.
Definitely. It's worth exploring, no question. The Necrons, they add so much to the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Scary, but really interesting, too. And they're going to change everything. Their story is all about ambition, betrayal, and just the constant fight to survive in a galaxy that feels like it's about to end. It really makes you think. It reminds you that even in the darkest parts of the universe, there are still stories to tell, mysteries to unravel, and battles to fight.
We've just started to explore the Necrons here, but hopefully you have a better sense of how complex and interesting they are.
Thanks for taking this deep dive into the Necron Empire with us. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war.